This has been heavily requested for a while now. A story that truly shook me to my core the first time I experienced it. Let me share with you every unsettling detail of that fateful pizza delivery night. I was working a late-night shift as a pizza delivery driver, a job I once did for a local pizza place. That night, I had an order for 4 large pizzas, and I thought maybe it's a party, which meant a potentially fat tip. I remember that drive being the longest I'd ever made on a delivery run. The 20-minute trip on winding dirt roads wasn't unusual out where I lived, but something about the darkness made the journey feel even longer and more eerie. When I finally pulled up to the address, I was met with an unsettling sight. An old, dilapidated building standing alone in the middle of a forest clearing. There were no parked cars, no streetlights, only the silent, looming trees. My heart began to race, but I knew I had to complete the delivery. I parked my car and called my boss, asking him to read the address back to me 3 times to be sure I had the right location. His gruff tone told me he wasn't in a good mood, and he curtly instructed me to at least knock on the door and check it out. Normally, my boss would scold me if I returned even 1 pizza, but I was too frightened to think about any repercussions if I brought back all 4. Reluctantly, I stepped out of the car and approached the building. There was no doorbell, so I knocked loudly on the heavy front door. For a long moment, nothing happened. I wasn't surprised to get no answer, but the silence only deepened my unease. It felt like I'd wasted both my time and gas. I knocked again, a bit more desperately, and soon began to hear faint rustling noises from somewhere inside. Hoping for some kind of explanation, I knocked once more and called out that I was the pizza guy, yet only silence returned. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I caught a glimpse of something through a nearby window. There, peering out from the dark interior, were a pair of eyes. I couldn't tell if they belonged to a man or a woman, but they were wide open, staring at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. In that instant, my terror took over. I dropped the pizzas and bolted back to my car. As I fumbled with the keys, my car wouldn't start at first. It took a few frantic tries before the engine finally roared to life. I sped away from the building, back onto the dirt road, but something felt off. The car began to shake and bump, as if something was wrong with it. Before I could gather my thoughts, a sharp scraping noise came from outside and the car abruptly stopped. I stepped out to see what was happening and a chill shot through me. My eyes fell to the tires. Each one was slashed, completely removed from the rims. It was clear that someone had vandalized my car while I was at that creepy building. My heart pounded as I locked the doors and sat inside, too scared to move, yet too close to that ominous structure. I could barely see the building now, hidden behind a mass of trees, but I knew it was still there. Trembling, I called 911 and explained everything in a shaky voice. The operator assured me that the police were on their way and told me to stay locked inside the car. I asked whether it would be safer to run or to stay put, and she firmly said that staying inside was best, keeping the door locked. She kept me on the line until help arrived, while I sat there, my body shaking and surrounded by the endless dark forest. As I scanned the windows, making sure no one else was outside, I looked into my rearview mirror and froze. There, standing where I had seen that mysterious pair of eyes before, was the same person. This time, it was unmistakably a woman. Her eyes were even wider, and I could see a faint, sinister smile spreading slowly across her face. That sight pushed me over the edge. Without a second thought, I flung open the door and sprinted into the woods. I didn't care about making noise. All I cared about escaping. I ran until I was out of breath, finally hiding behind a large, fallen log. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to control my ragged breathing, and waited. Waited for what felt like an eternity until I finally heard the distant sound of sirens. Gaining every bit of strength I had left, I made my way back toward the road. Soon I saw the flashing red and blue lights of police cars approaching. Relief surged through me as 2 police cars pulled up in front of my car. Officers with flashlights began to investigate, and I couldn't help but yell for help as if I were a madman. They quickly helped me out of the car and listened patiently as I recounted every terrifying detail of that night. One officer even went over to the building with a partner, and they returned with only a few spiky objects, the same type used to slash my tires. The police speculated that whoever was responsible might have been a twisted, disturbed couple. I had clearly seen the woman, but they never managed to find her. Even now, the thought of her eerie smile and those unblinking eyes still sends shivers down my spine. After that night, I quit my job without hesitation and started working at a local grocery store. I'll never forget that chilling encounter or the fear that gripped me as I saw that haunting figure at the back of my car. Every time I think back to that delivery, my heart still races, and I can't help but wonder about the dark secrets hidden in that lonely forest clearing. And that, my friends, is the unforgettable tale of the midnight pizza delivery, one experience that changed my life forever. Story number 2. There was this one time I was out late drinking with friends during the summer of 2016. We'd spent the evening laughing, joking, and wandering through our quiet town, the warm night air filled with a carefree buzz. As we strolled along the familiar streets, one of my friends suddenly stopped and pointed toward a bush in front of an old, unassuming house. "Look," he whispered excitedly. We all edged closer, curious to see what he'd found. There, hidden in the dense leaves, was a vague, almost imperceptible figure. A person or something else lurking silently in the shadows. The sight was odd and mysterious, like a secret someone didn't want to reveal. Just as we began to wonder about the stranger in the bush, an unexpected, off-putting sound emerged. It wasn't loud, but it was disturbingly eerie, an unsettling noise that seemed to vibrate with a strange familiarity, like it belonged to the night itself. Our hearts jumped, and without warning, we all burst into startled screams and ran in different directions. Although the fear was real in the bewildering haze of that summer night, we also found ourselves laughing nervously afterward, dismissing the incident as a prank or a trick of our tired eyes. I eventually made it home, still feeling the lingering chill of the encounter, despite the laughter and disbelief that followed. That night, I was very drunk, and I fell asleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. But what happened next was anything but a peaceful slumber. I woke up to near total darkness, lying in my bed, unable to move. A state of sleep paralysis had gripped me so completely that my body was frozen. I couldn't even check the time, as every part of me remained completely still. In that terrifying moment, as I lay helpless in the dark, I began to hear a sound that I recognized all too well. It was the same eerie noise from the bush earlier that night. My eyes darted around in the pitch black, searching for the source of the sound, when I saw something that defies explanation. Right at the foot of my bed, a grotesque, horrifying head appeared, emerging slowly from the darkness. It wasn't just floating in midair. There was a body, though its form blended with the shadows of the room. Its face was ghastly, features twisted and distorted, with eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul, and a mouth hung open in a silent, eternal scream. The sight was pure nightmare fuel. The head moved closer, inch by inch, and every detail became more vivid and terrifying. I could almost feel its cold, malevolent presence as it approached, the same off-putting sound echoing softly around us. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to cry out or even move a muscle. Just as it reached a point where I felt its gaze was right against my face, the apparition suddenly began to fade away into the darkness, as if swallowed by the night itself. With a surge of adrenaline and relief, my body finally broke free from the paralysis. and I let out a blood-curdling scream. I scrambled upright in bed, my heart pounding wildly, and fumbled for the bedside lamp. As soon as the light flickered on, I scanned the room frantically, but the demonic presence was gone, leaving only the lingering terror and silence in its wake. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, panting and shaking, struggling to believe what had just happened. The experience felt so vivid and real that I couldn't shake the feeling that I had truly encountered something otherworldly, a presence that had invaded the fragile space between sleep and wakefulness. The next day, still trembling from the shock, I told my parents about the horrifying episode. They listened carefully and eventually suggested that it was a case of sleep paralysis, a phenomenon where people wake up unable to move, often accompanied by terrifying hallucinations. Yet even as they explained it away as a trick of the mind, they admitted that they had never heard of anyone seeing something as vivid and frightening as what I experienced. To this day, the memory of that night continues to haunt me, the blend of a mysterious encounter during a night out, followed by a terrifying episode of sleep paralysis, where a demonic, grotesque head appeared inches from my face, remains an enigma I can neither fully explain nor forget. Story number 3. It's a little-known common courtesy out in the mountains during a snowstorm that if someone is seeking shelter in your cabin, you let them in. But that night, I wasn't the one offering shelter. I was the one desperately needing refuge. I had planned a long weekend of hunting, expecting a cold but clear day in the woods. However, as the day wore on, dark storm clouds gathered quickly, and before I knew it, a full-blown blizzard had taken over. After a rather unsuccessful day of hunting, I found myself far from my cabin, disoriented and struggling against the biting cold. With the snow swirling around me and no clear path home, I knew I had to find shelter. Fast. Wandering through the whiteout, I suddenly spotted a small log cabin nestled among a circle of trees. Its exterior was dark and uninviting, with no lights shining from within, yet it was the only sign of civilization in an endless, frozen landscape. I approached it, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. I tried the door, knocking hard with my fist several times. At first there was silence, but then I heard footsteps moving on the other side. I shouted, "I'm lost and need shelter." The door cracked open just a little, and a gruff voice replied, "Come in. Leave your boots by the door." I paused for a moment, expecting the person inside to step out and greet me properly, but instead the door remained barely ajar, and all I saw was a darkened interior. Gathering my courage, I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. The cabin's interior was dimly lit by the gentle glow of 2 candles placed on a small table. Their light was soft and flickering, just enough to reveal a worn couch in the center of the room. A lone figure, only a shadowy silhouette, stood at the far end where the candlelight faded into darkness. Without offering any further words, the man silently pointed me toward the couch, implying that I should rest there until the storm passed. Exhausted and shivering from the cold, I dropped my bag and even my old hunting rifle on the floor and sat down on the couch. "Thank you," I murmured, expecting some kind of reply or even a nod of reassurance. But the man said nothing. His silence, combined with his mysterious presence, made my skin crawl, yet I tried to convince myself that perhaps people in the mountains simply behaved differently. I closed my eyes, hoping to sleep off the unease that had taken root in my heart. However, the darkness of the room felt just as oppressive, with my eyes shut. I listened intently, waiting for the sound of his footsteps to fade away as he moved off to another part of the cabin, but the silence persisted. I heard nothing more. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly opened my eyes again. To my horror, the shadowy figure was still standing in the corner of the room. I could not tell his exact features. but the faint light from the candles revealed a hint of a pale face along his forehead, so pale that it almost seemed otherworldly. My heart raced as I realized he had moved closer, silently inching nearer by a few feet. I mustered a shaky voice and said, "Yeah, I think I'm just going to get some sleep now. Thanks." But he offered no response. Overwhelmed by a sudden surge of fear, I gathered my belongings as quickly as I could. I mumbled another thank you, though my voice trembled, and without looking back, I pulled on my boots and dashed out of the cabin into the raging blizzard. The howling wind and the swirling snow blurred everything as I raced down the hill, desperate to leave that eerie place behind. Not long after, as I struggled against the cold and fatigue, I came across another cabin down the hill. Unlike the first, this one had warm lights glowing from its windows. I hurried over and knocked on the door. An elderly man and his wife answered almost immediately, their faces kind and inviting. They welcomed me inside, offering a hot cup of tea and a comfortable spot on their couch. Once I felt a bit more at ease, I recounted my harrowing experience about the strange cabin on the hill. The old couple exchanged puzzled glances, and after a moment, the woman spoke up softly. "Honey, that cabin you're talking about, its owner was murdered 2 years ago. It's been empty ever since." Their words sent shivers down my spine. The quiet, unresponsive figure in the dark cabin wasn't a living man offering refuge. He was a remnant of a tragic past, a ghost from a place that should have remained abandoned. That night, huddled with the kind couple as the blizzard raged outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mountains held secrets too deep and dark for any living soul to fully comprehend. The memory of that silent, ghostly presence and the chill of the cold, unforgiving storm still haunt me to this day. Story number 4. I'm 27 years old, and I live alone in a quiet rural town in Virginia, just 2 blocks away from my parents' home. My mom, now in her 60s and suffering from mild dementia, has become a constant, worrisome presence in my life. I gave her a spare key long ago, and ever since, she sometimes shows up uninvited. It's both endearing and annoying. I might come home after a night out only to find her sitting in my living room, waiting anxiously for me like a child. Despite the oddity, I've always tolerated it because, well, you don't really know my mom. That fateful Saturday night, around 2 in the morning, I had been out at a nearby club with some college friends, the only place to have some fun in our otherwise sleepy town. When it was time to go home, I said my goodbyes and made the short 3-block walk back to my house. In my drunken haze, I reached for my keys at the door, only to discover that the door was unlocked. Immediately, I realized my mom had been there again. Inside, the scene was typical of her unexpected visits. On the kitchen counter lay a note in her familiar handwriting saying, "You forgot this at our house," placed next to a box of half-eaten cake my parents had decided they didn't want. I assumed she had already gone upstairs to sleep in the guest room, a routine for her after all, and I could even hear footsteps coming from above. Sighing at the thought of yet another sleepless night waiting on me, I headed upstairs. But when I reached the guest room and the nearby bathrooms, they were empty. A strange chill ran down my spine. Had she wandered off again, or was something else going on? Uneasy, I grabbed my phone and called my dad, who was already awake at our parents' house. In his groggy voice, he asked what was wrong. I explained that I'd heard my mom wandering upstairs in my house. Then, after a long, heavy pause, he said, "That's not possible. She's sleeping right next to me." I froze. My heart began pounding as I turned to look toward the darkened stairway. In the faint light coming from the kitchen below, I saw something that I'll never forget. A head, barely visible, peering around the corner at the top of the stairs. It wasn't a clear face, just an outline, but it was enough. The head was watching me, and in that instant, terror took over. I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking as I bolted out of my house. I ran down the street, not daring to look back, until I reached my parents' home. On the way, I kept explaining to my dad what I'd seen. Halfway there, he assured me he was calling the police. When I arrived, my mom was already waiting at the door, looking worried as always. Calmly, she explained that she had come over to clean my kitchen and to bring the leftover cake. Soon, 2 police cars pulled up, and officers accompanied my dad and me back to my house to investigate. One officer stayed with us outside while 2 others conducted a thorough search, checking the crawl space, the attic, every corner of the house. After what felt like an eternity, the officers returned and confirmed that nothing was amiss, except for one unsettling detail. The door had been left unlocked, and I was certain I'd seen the outline of a head at the top of the stairs. The police found no signs of an intruder, but that strange, inexplicable moment haunted me. I didn't feel safe staying in my house that night, so I spent the rest of it at my parents'. Later, my dad and I agreed that my mom had probably forgotten to lock the door, a simple mistake made more likely by her fading memory. From that day on, my dad decided to stop her from coming over alone. It was a bittersweet solution. I was relieved to feel safer, yet saddened by the growing signs of her condition. Even now, years later, some nights I still get an inexplicable chill, a lingering worry that whatever I saw that night never truly left my home. It serves as a constant reminder that sometimes the most unsettling experiences can occur in the very place where you expect to be safe. Story number 5. This still remains to be the most haunting, unexplainable experience of my life. It was an ordinary evening, and I was upstairs in my room, deeply focused on writing a history paper. I believed I was completely alone in the house, until I heard a familiar voice. My mom's voice, clear and insistent, called out my name from somewhere downstairs. At first, I was mildly annoyed by the interruption. After all, I was in the middle of concentrating on my work. Reluctantly, I decided to see what she needed. I walked downstairs, expecting to find her in the usual spot, but the living room was empty. I called out, "Mom?" and was surprised to hear my name echoed back. But it wasn't coming from the kitchen or the hall. Instead, it seemed to be coming from deep within the house, all the way from the basement. Curiosity mixed with a growing sense of unease as I approached the basement door. Oddly, the light by the door was off, making it impossible to tell what lay beyond. I called out again, "Mom?" And the reply was the same, flat and unchanging in tone each time. Something about the sameness of her voice sent a chill down my spine. I flicked the light on and slowly descended the basement stairs. Nearing the bottom, I heard her call my name once more. It was as if the sound was coming from all around me, yet I couldn't see her anywhere. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed an unusual detail. A small crawlspace closet door was slightly ajar. This wasn't one of the regular closet doors. It was the kind you have to crouch down and crawl into, occupying a significant section of the basement. It was the only possible place left where my mom might be hidden. I took a deep breath and called out one final time, "Mom?" There was no response, only a heavy silence. Drawn by both concern and dread, I inched closer to the open closet. I got down on my knees and peered inside. The space was pitch black, so dark that I could see nothing at all. A wave of fear washed over me as I softly asked, "Mom, are you messing with me?" The only sound in reply was the faint, constant buzzing of the basement light. That moment was enough. Terrified and confused, I scrambled back up the stairs and slammed, then locked the basement door behind me without looking back. I couldn't understand what I had just witnessed, and the unsettling feeling refused to leave me. Still shaken, I grabbed the house phone and dialed my mom's cell number. After several rings, she finally answered. I was relieved to hear a familiar voice on the other end, only to learn that she was out grocery shopping at that very moment. I tried to explain the bizarre experience, the echoing voice, the open closet in the dark, and the eerie silence that followed my calls. But she didn't believe me. Of course, she thought I was just playing a trick or overreacting. It took nearly half an hour of pleading for her to agree that something might be off. Later, when my dad returned home, both he and my mom joined me in a cautious trip back down to the basement. The small closet door was still open, exactly as I had left it. My dad went inside to check, but there was no sign of anyone, no trace of my mom or any mysterious presence. Even though everything appeared normal afterward, that experience left a deep mark on me. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something unexplainable had occurred that night. Something that defies logic, and it continues to haunt me every time I think back on it. Thanks for listening. Goodbye. Have a restful sleep.